Good evening. My name is Regan Williams. I work with Bob Murray and Associates. We're an executive recruiting firm working with the city in finding your new police chief. I'd like to let each of you know that there will be an online feedback form available at auroragov.org/policechieftownhall. Following the meeting this evening, if you would go there and provide us with feedback, that would be great. The meeting will be simultaneously interpreted into Spanish on Comcast Channel 881, also spoken in Spanish by an interpreter. Before we begin, I want to start the evening with some background on our process. We started the search for Aurora's next police chief in January of 2020. At that time, the mayor and council and the city manager asked that we seek input from the Aurora community about the needs and desires that they have for the next police chief. Through a number of stakeholder meetings and a community-wide survey, we heard from a few hundred residents, and here are some of the key priorities that you, the community, shared with us. They identified trust issues with some segments of the community and the police department. They wanted a chief who would build relationships with the community. They were interested in a police department that reflects the makeup of the community. They wanted a chief that was trustworthy and transparent. They wanted a strong leader. They wanted somebody with a history of success reducing crime and a history of positive relationships with the press, someone that with experience creating positive relationships with youth, and someone that was accountable for what the police department does. Now, that's just a touch of the kinds of feedback that we heard. We conducted an extensive national search that resulted in 31 applicants. 6 of those were interviewed. This evening, we are here to introduce you to the 4 finalists and provide an opportunity to have them answer your questions. I'd like each of the candidates to start with a short introduction, 2 to 3 minutes, and I'm going to do that alphabetically, and we'll start with Marcus Dudley Jr.
Regan, before we get started, we have a brief announcement in Spanish.
Excuse me. Thank you.
La junta de esta noche será emitida en vivo en español con interpretación por el canal Comcast 881 en Aurora. Una grabación de esta junta en español también estará disponible para ser vista en auroratv.org esta semana. Gracias.
All right, Marcus Dudley Jr., go ahead.
Thank you. I also want to show some appreciation for this opportunity to participate in the forums. I'm Commander Marcus Dudley, an internal candidate that works for the Aurora Police Department. I have lived within the city of Aurora for 28 years. I've been with the police department for 23 plus years. When I think about Aurora, it's not just a place that I work, it's also a place that I call home. I received my Bachelor's of Arts in Business Economics with a concentration in Management and Finance from Bethany College in Kansas. Upon graduating from college, I went to work for CH2M Hill, an environmental engineering firm out in the Denver Tech Center in Denver, or in the Greenwood Village area. I chose to join the police department. I felt a passion to want to serve my community and to represent as a person of color and as a resident of the city of Aurora. I've had a multitude of assignments within the department as I've worked through the ranks. My most recent assignments, the commands that I've had, has included the patrol commander for District 2 Station, the Investigations Bureau, and now currently as the commander over Internal Affairs. I think when you look at my education and you look at my work experience, what you gather is 3 unique skills. The first skill is that I have the ability to build partnerships, both inside and outside the organization. Additionally, you will find that I am a conceptual thinker, someone who has the ability to work on a multitude of projects while at the same time still maintaining a vision on the big picture. And then lastly, you'll find that I have analytical skills, that ability to take complex issues and develop simple solutions. I think right now, given recent events at this time and around the country, those skills make me well suited to be the next chief of police for for the city of Aurora. Thank you.
Next candidate, Alexander Jones.
Good evening. I'm Al Jones. It gives me great pleasure to be in front of you today. I'm from Baltimore County, Maryland. I served the county for 25 years. Baltimore County is the 18th largest police agency in the country. We have 1,914 office sworn members, along with 500 professional staff. We handle about 650,000 calls for service a year. We cover 614 square miles and another 175 square miles of water. We have a very diverse community of 850,000 residents that call Baltimore County their home. Now for me, I've come up through the ranks in Baltimore County. I served in patrol. I've served internal affairs. In 2007, I became a part of our leadership team. I spent 14 years a part of Baltimore County's leadership team. As a captain, I commanded the Towson Precinct, which is the county seat. I quickly obtained a great understanding of political aspects of policing and interacting with the public, as well as the politicians. As a major, I oversaw 10 precincts, which that was the first time in Baltimore County history that one person managed all 10 precincts in our area. I managed those 10 precincts for 4 years. As the area major, I was responsible for developing crime deployment strategies. In 2014, Baltimore County Police saw the lowest crime numbers in 39 years. As the Colonel of Operation, which I was promoted in 2015, I oversaw 3/4 of the department. Between being the major and the Colonel of Operations for 7 years, we saw a reduction of 5 of those 7 years. We also saw our agency come under budget during those times. I'm currently assigned to the Community Relations Bureau. Our mission is to build trust and legitimacy within the community. I have done this by attending meetings, talking about transparency, engagement, respect, and accountability. We have established many focus groups within Baltimore County, which consist of community members, business leaders, faith-based leaders, advocacy members, and members of the police department. We are discussing best practices and ways to build trust within our community. I'm interested in becoming the chief of a major city. I want to lead an agency that is respected, but also that needs to effect some changes to continue to be recognized as one of the leaders in the country. I feel Aurora Police Department is very similar to Baltimore County. The only difference is the size and scope. Aurora is a little bit smaller than Baltimore County. I think Aurora is facing some of the same challenges that my agency faced. I feel that I'm confident that I can address these challenges and make Aurora and the community a better place. My education, training, knowledge, and experience has prepared me for this assignment. I just want to take this last little bit of minute to say, listen, I think that I am suited for become a chief here. I understand the challenges, and I think that I'll do an excellent job. So thank you.
Thank you. Next candidate, Avery Moore.
Good evening. I'm Avery Moore. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I've been with the Dallas Police Department for 29 years. It'll be 30 years in November. I'm currently the assistant chief for the Dallas Police Department. Educationally, I have an associate's degree in psychology, a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and a master's degree in management. I'm a military kid. My father was a veteran in the Army for 27 years. I've had the opportunity to live in a different country, lived in Germany on 2 tours, Illesheim and Augsburg. My father retired in Oklahoma, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Lawton. I graduated from Lawton High School, earned my degrees at Cameron University and my master's degree in 2008 in Dallas through the University of Phoenix. Like all the candidates here, I have an extensive background in policing. I've worked pretty much in every aspect of policing. I believe highly in community relationships, community engagement. I have a proven track record in community relations and engagement. Likewise, I believe that it's the responsibility of everyone, not just law enforcement, to reduce crime. In that area, I also have a proven track record. I understand that law enforcement is being critiqued right now due to circumstances in other states, but nonetheless, I think that it's an opportunity for us to change the narrative that police are bad guys, police only abuse people. I think we can do that here in Aurora, and we can do it one person at a time. I'm a hands-on assistant chief. Likewise, I would be a hands-on chief of police here. I had no interest in ever leaving Dallas. My goal was to retire. An opportunity presented itself from a friend of mine, your interim chief, Vanessa Wilson, asked me to apply. So I did. I came and visited the city. She showed me around, and I fell in love with the city of Aurora. And I believe that I have the background, the education, and the want to be the chief here and to help bridge the lack of trust for the police department. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to being your chief.
Okay, the last candidate, Vanessa Wilson.
Good evening. For those that are watching, we appreciate you taking the time to let your voices be heard and to ask difficult questions to the panel. I have 26 years of law enforcement experience. I have gone through every rank in this agency, from officer, agent, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. I was an acting commander during the last chief transition, and then I was appointed as the first female division chief in the history of the Aurora Police Department. I have an extensive background in investigations. I have a commitment to victim rights, and I've received national award for my work with the victims of crime. The men on this panel come with certain skills. What I would say to this community as I took over, it's easy to lead an agency when there's nothing going on, when there's no controversy. I took over this agency 6 months ago during one of an international embarrassment and crisis, and people saying that we had covered up a situation. I promised that day that I took over on January 1st that I would be transparent with this community and I would give them a voice, and I've done that. I have proven myself through a global pandemic. I have worked to eliminate and terminate officers that need to be held accountable. I've done that, and I've reached out to the community, and I've have a career of being in the city of Aurora, of building relationships within this community. So I am the chief. There's been a call to action, and I have responded to that call for action. I would like to continue this journey. I will tell you that I did reach out to Mr. Moore about applying for this position, and that was prior to me being given this interim chief job, because I really felt as though the glass ceiling, that I hit the glass ceiling as a division chief. I felt that the former interim chief that was supposed to take over had chosen not to promote me as the most senior division chief in the office, and I felt I needed to reach out to someone who I thought had integrity and that I knew was a consummate professional. And so I invited him to join this, and he's a formidable opponent. However, City Manager Twombly has given me that opportunity to break that ceiling, and he has given me the opportunity to lead. And therefore, I think I'm the right person for this job. I think the community is starting to build trust in this agency again, and I hope that I can continue. Thank you.
Thank you. A quick reminder again, if you have questions to submit, please go to auroragov.org/police chief town hall. And also at the end of tonight's broadcast, if you could go to that site and provide us some feedback on your thoughts on the 4 candidates. We had more than 800 questions submitted to us, and obviously we're not going to be able to ask 800 questions. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we're able to tonight, but we'll make sure to include questions from each category of those questions that we received. First question, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate through the candidates in different order to let so occasionally one candidate will be first, and then I'll rotate that order. So first question comes out of Ward 1 Town Hall meeting. Aurora is one of the most diverse and international large cities in the country. what would you do to ensure the Aurora Police Department, including its administration, better reflect the community it serves through recruiting, retention, and promotion? And I think I'll start with Vanessa with the first question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams. I think the diversity within this city is a beautiful thing, and it's our strength. Obviously, the police department, as it stands today, is 75% Caucasian, 3.9% African American, about 11% Hispanic, and Asian American about 4%, as well as 2 or more races. That's not okay, and we need to do better. And so one of my ideas that I would like to do is working along with our Civil Service Commission. We have a very vibrant Explorer program. It's extremely diverse. It has youth in this community that are learning duty, integrity, are learning volunteerism, and are committed to being part of helping this police department. I'd like to ask at some point with the Civil Service Commission that the chief get 3 to 5 spots in each academy, that we can take those explorers that are a mirror of diversity within our community through immigrant, persons of color, and women, and allow them to bring them into the police academy as a chief's pick. I think that can quickly, as 2 academies a year, that can quickly change the dynamics of this agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Next candidate, Avery Moore, and I can read that question again if you'd like. It's somewhat long.
Yes, if you would, please.
Okay. Aurora is one of the most diverse and international large cities in the country. What would you do to ensure the Aurora Police Department, including its administration, better reflects the community it serves through recruiting, retention, and promotion?
So I actually think that relates to community relationships. I think that if you want a diversified police department, as it should be, the police department should be a microcosm of the communities that they serve. You have to go out to the community and recruit. So if you need more minorities, if you need more women, you have to go where more minorities are. You have to go where more women are. There's several universities that offer that, so you have to really focus your attention on what your need is and address it from a recruiting perspective. As it relates to promotions, I think it's the same thing. You have to position people in positions that they can be promoted, and you can't use biases to pass over people simply because you don't like them or you don't like their skin color. To be 2020 and we're still having the same argument as it relates to racial relations is really ridiculous and sad. So I would address it straight on. As I said earlier, I'm a hands-on chief, and that's what I would be here. And so whatever we need as I communicate with the public, that's what I would address, and that's the people that I would go after. I love the idea that Vanessa brought up as far as explorers. I think that's one aspect. To broaden that, you can go directly to schools, and you have to present a package to policing that people can relate to. So if you want more minorities, you have to send minority officers there to do your recruiting. Likewise with ladies. If you want more ladies, you have to send ladies out to do recruiting. So it has to be a collective teamwork. We all have to work on recruiting to get what we need for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. A quick reminder here, if you do not have online access, this is for the community, you can call 303-739-6956 if you want to include some questions. Thank you. All right, same question for Candidate Jones. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate it, though. I would have to agree with Assistant Chief Moore. If you actually really are truly interested in building a diverse department, you actually have to start building those relationships with the community. Can't express how important those relationships are. We have to look at the faith-based community. I think that the faith-based community can actually assist us in bridging those gaps where we're actually lacking the understanding or the relationships that we need. The second point that I would make is before you can actually really start doing any type of meaningful recruitment, you actually have to take a look at the minorities inside your agency. How do they view your agency? Are they being treated fairly? I think those are the things that you have to look at. Because listen, they're going to be the biggest mouthpiece for our agency. Usually a lot of our recruiting is done through word of mouth, and if minorities in the agency are not being treated fairly, they're not going to go out and actually speak for you. The next point I'm going to make is what we do in Baltimore County is we have a cadet program that we actually partner up with the high schools, the kids that are interested in criminal justice programs. We actually mentor those, and we actually bring them in our agency at the age of 18. Think about this, an 18-year-old coming on to the police department, making $26,000 a year, while at the same time are able to go to college and the department assists in paying some of their education. I think that is a great farm system for our agency, and actually it's actually been very beneficial. So far, since we've actually started our cadet program 10 years ago, we've seen an increase in minority population within our agency, and I think that's a great start. At least that, you know, we're building relationships not only with the community but with school as well.
Same question for candidate Dudley. Would you like me to read it again, or are you fine?
No, I'm fine. And, you know, the interesting thing about being the last person to speak is that so much has already been said. So I want to echo what Chief Wilson has said with regards to citizen involvement, also what Mr. Moore has said with regards to us needing to engage better with the schools. And then I absolutely have to agree with what Mr. Jones said. My idea was going to be the cadet program. And a part of the reason why I think that that needs to be a focus is because we are in some difficult financial times. And we have being able to have large numbers of officers come into large classes is going to be significantly reduced. And so with less spots, that means that we have to cultivate more talent to be able to fill the seats in our academy classes. And what better way than to have a cadet program where we actually are paying folks to there. Our approach needs to be to make sure that we're recruiting in a way like a college campus would and not just let them get away. And so one of the best ways to do that is working through the community and their activities and doing our recruiting at those events. With regards to retention and promotion, I think a lot of that has to do with succession planning, and not just the kind of succession planning where you put people into positions that you like and you want to see advance, but where you actually codify some building blocks, some bridge building that allows people a better understanding of how getting this skill will assist you in promoting to the other.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder, the meeting's being simultaneously interpreted into Spanish on Comcast channel 881. Okay, we're going to go on to the second question. A mother to a toddler in Northwest Aurora says, I have become numb to hearing gunshots while lying in bed at night. How will you promote community relations so that families can feel and be safer? Get to know our neighborhood patrol, and actively engage in community events with the officers protecting us so we don't feel like strangers. And I'll start this one with candidate Dudley.
So one of the things that we do at the Aurora Police Department after we have a critical incident is we send officers back into the neighborhood to hand out flyers to give a brief description of what crime occurred, and for them to also make contact with residents that live in the neighborhood to let them know or reassure them that the crime is being addressed and whether or not there should be any concerns going forward for the safety of the folks in the community. I think that that needs to continue to be an approach. I think we also need to use an intelligence-led policing approach that allows us to use technology to help to identify who's committing the crimes. One of the proposals that I would make right away is that we develop a real-time information center. And that information center would allow us to be able to have actual technology cameras that are in public places, on public streets, monitoring what's going on so that when a call comes in, dispatch, here's a call, the information could be relayed and monitored on camera to identify the person who's committing the crime. The benefit there is we get away from this unconstitutional policing or the concern thereof by making sure that we're contacting the people who are directly involved in the circumstance rather than doing person meets the description or the vehicle meets the description and we make a contact. It's those kinds of things that deteriorate the trust that the community has in us. So through using intelligence, through using technology, we can avoid some of those issues and make people feel more safe in their communities.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate it. So when you're talking about dealing with violent crime and gunshots, I think that you have to take a multi-faceted approach to violence. The first thing that I would look at is implementing a police or precision policing strategy. It actually has two components to it. The first component is a really robust crime analysis section, which is focusing trying to identify these trigger pullers. The second piece of trying to identify these trigger pullers and also making sure that we have a good CompStat process where we're sharing this information and sharing data across the city. Because think about it. These violent offenders just don't hang out in one area. They're very transient. So we want to make sure that we start sharing the information in real time. The second component of precision policing is good, solid neighborhood policing where we're putting officers out inside the community where we're building relationships. We can't just look at every person that's inside of Aurora as criminals. We only have 5% criminals here in Aurora, and we have to actually make sure that we're not treating everyone as criminals, and we have to make sure that we're focusing not only on crime, but also on people. The other thing that I would say about and I have to agree, is technology has to play a major part in the crime fight, whether it's using license plate readers or CCTV or crime or CCTV. But I think technology has to play a major part in doing it. The other piece is that we actually have to make sure that we're setting partnerships with our local, state, federal partners so that we can actually look at looking at crime across the city and making sure that we're actually continuing a partnership with our partners and our ally partners to actually focus on crime.
Thank you. Candidate Moore, same question.
So the question was in regards to random gunshots fires.
Yeah, let me read it again. As a mother to a toddler in Northwest Aurora, I have become numb to hearing gunshots while laying in bed at night. How will you promote community relations so that families can feel and be safer, get to know our neighborhood patrol, and actively engage in community events with the patrol officers protecting us so we don't feel like strangers?
So the first thing I would do is apologize. Everyone has the right to be safe in their communities, and that's a fair expectation from police. Random gunshot fire is not something you should be numb to, because the reality is someone could be injured, property could be damaged, etc. So I would first encourage you to dial 911 so an officer can respond. If you would want to remain anonymous, that's fine, but you need to call 911. Secondly, I would encourage you to get involved in community meetings. I would encourage you to get involved with the police department directly, because crime is everybody's business, whether it's random gunfire or something more serious. Third thing I would do is invite you personally to come out to some of the community events in your area. I think community involvement is important. I think that's a way that we can bridge the lack of trust with law enforcement. And again, I think it's really ridiculous that a person is numb to gunshot fire. We shouldn't be numb to that, because again, it's wrong, it is against the law, and it's something that I would take serious, and I do, because I do know that bullets stray and innocent people are shot and killed. So call 911.
Thank you. Candidate Wilson.
Yes, sir. So this boils down to trust. For us to make an impact for that mother and her child, for them to feel safe in their community, they have to feel trust to call the police and know that they aren't going to be treated differently due to the color of their skin or their immigration status. We have to have trust that they can come forward as a witness. We have to have trust in us that we're not going to ask their immigration status, that we aren't going to turn them into ICE. And so with that, I would say I'd ask for the Aurora Community of Faith, other organizations, and the city. The city has a responsibility to go into those neighborhoods and have events that we can have those discussions and break down those barriers that we have. This is a uniform that we wear, and we're people under this, and they need to be able to talk to their PAR officers. They need to get to know who is responsible for their area and trust in them that when they call them, they are actually going to respond and they are going to help them deal with the situation. The fact that she's become numb is disturbing to me as the interim chief of police, and I would ask that she trust us to come out. And again, reassurance policing, we need to get out there after a critical incident and explain what happened. We also need to make sure that we're doing that in multiple languages and that we are using Twitter and our Spanish accounts that we have, reaching out to Univision and different agencies. And so the people in that community that may be at work and may not be there when we go and knock on those doors and pass out flyers, have those questions answered, because we work for the people and we need to answer those questions and try to instill safety in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Third question. The majority of the questions that we received for tonight's town hall concern the case of Elijah McClain. As chief, how would you respond to the community's outrage regarding this incident, and are there any specific steps that you would take coming into the job now? And we'll start with candidate Moore.
So I did have an opportunity to read the newspaper article as it related to Elijah McClain. I did not have an opportunity to read any of the investigative notes, so I don't know what that process is or was. I would just make sure that it was a complete and thorough investigation from an administrative perspective as well as a criminal investigation. And then I would make my decisions based on the outcome of those investigations. Again, I don't have the intimacies of it, but that would be what I would say off the top. I would have loved to have had the opportunity to meet with the family, to go over the videotape with them, get their concerns, address their concerns, and share with them the process that was about to come so they wouldn't be caught off guard.
Okay, next candidate, candidate Wilson.
Can you repeat the question, sir?
Yes. The majority of the questions we received for tonight's town hall concern the case of Elijah McClain. As chief, how would you respond to the community's outrage regarding this incident, and are there any specific steps that you would take coming into the job now?
Okay. With that, I am the interim police chief, and so I have started those conversations, and I've gone to those community meetings, and I've gone to those rallies, and I've gone and talked to people face to face and listened to their anger and listened to their pain. We need to remember that this community lost a vibrant young man, and that tragedy cannot be reversed. But what we can do as a police agency is change the way we do business. And there's sweeping police reform. People are talking about systemic racism across the country, and it's time for us to listen to the people. I'm looking forward to working with a task force that has just been put together by council. I've reached out personally to specific activists within this community that have the heartbeat and the pulse of the community, and they're telling me exactly what's happening. And so I'm having those tough conversations, and they can turn from yelling and anger to tears and try to heal this community, and that's what we need to focus on. A couple directive changes that I've made is we need to talk about implicit bias in this community. We need to talk about racism in this community, and when someone's called in as a suspicious person, it should never be because of the color of their skin. What I'm saying is, in law enforcement in general, we need to look differently at how we do business. I've put in a directive, a suspicious call directive, that gives the ability for the officer to go to the call, to take a look at what's happening, and then make that decision. Is this person being suspicious, Or is this possibly some implicit bias that's happening in our community that they're called in the first place? So I've put a directive that our call takers and our dispatchers will ask those specific questions. An example of if 3 Hispanic males are walking down the street, young teenagers just in backpacks, and they're being called as suspicious, I need to know what is it about them that makes them suspicious to you, and we need to have the ability not to respond to that call and not to have that negative interaction with the community.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley.
The Elijah McClain case is a tragic case. I was the commander over the Investigations Bureau when the incident happened. It was tragic for the family, and I understand that they are angry and that they are frustrated. I know that we took an approach that is considered a victim-centered approach in working with the family. And the purpose of that was so that we could be transparent and reassure them that we would provide a fair and impartial investigation. We did not want them to be re-traumatized by being told the standard procedure of it's a criminal investigation, so we can't share any information with you. Once we had the interviews completed, we invited the family in. LaWayne Mosley, Elijah's father, and Shanine McClain, Elijah's mother. And they brought their attorneys, and we had our victim's advocate manager there. We had clergy there. And we spent time reviewing the body-worn camera footage because that's what we promised. One of the most difficult things I've ever had to do is to spend time with a family that is having to grieve and see their son in that way. It's had a tremendous impact on our department. The members that were involved there that day are still grieving. I know people want answers. I wish that I could provide more answers. We submitted the case to the coroner's office. They made their findings. We submitted the case to the district attorney's office. They rendered their decision. And I can't change that. But we can continue to work moving forward on looking at how we address issues. And from that point forward, address some policy changes that might be able to help prevent another incident like that. Sorry, I'm over time.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones.
Obviously, I wasn't a part of the case being in Baltimore, but I will say this, it was truly, truly a tragic event. Something no community, no police department should have to go through. Walking through the door as the new chief, one of the things I would start looking at is our policies. We have to make sure that we have policies in place to make sure that we are not using force that's unnecessary. And like I said, I don't know the full details of the story or the case, but these are the things that I'm just thinking. Also, I want to make sure that we're not stopping people illegally and stopping them and frisking them illegally, and making sure that we are looking at our training and our accountability and our compliance. I think all of those things are important because I think that when you're talking a tragic situation like this, it not only have a profound effect on the community, but also the police department as well. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question. As the new chief of police, what will be your main focus in the first 6 to 12 months, and what is your vision for the Aurora Police Department? And I'll start with candidate Jones.
Thank you for the question. So one of the things that I would be looking at is definitely risk management. As I started this process in search, what I've learned is, unfortunately, a lot of agencies around the country and here in Aurora as well, we get sued often here in Aurora. In the last 5 years, we spent $5 million on lawsuits. And the three areas that we got sued in is use of force, illegal stop, searches, and arrest, and number 3, bias policing. Now, if we know that those 3 areas are the areas where we're paying money out and we're being sued, we can predict those areas. And if we can predict those areas, then we can actually prevent those areas. We just have to make sure that we are providing policies that make sense, that are in line with the new House Bill 217, so that our officers are enforcing the law that by the cover, enforcing laws that make sense. Second, we have to make sure that we're providing the proper training on the policies that we were getting sued. And the third area is we have to make sure that we have the accountability. We have to make sure our supervisors and our officers are held accountable for when they actually violate those laws. And then the last piece I'm going to say is that we have to have a very, very robust compliance area so that we can actually hold everybody accountable. So thank you.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley. You need me to repeat it?
Please do.
What will be your main focus as the chief of police in the first 6 to 12 months? What is your vision for the Aurora Police Department?
So I think right away what we're hearing is a lot of concerns from our citizens that they want us to re-examine and reform our use of force policies. So I think we need to take a careful examination of that. We also have several new laws within the state of Colorado that we need to make sure that we're working towards providing training so that officers are aware of how they could be in compliance with those laws. We also need to take a look at how we get more citizen engagement, citizen involvement in activities of the police department, such as hiring, recruiting, our promotional process, and then, of course, involvement in our discipline process. What I would like to see happen or be accomplished in that first 6 to 12 months is that we move towards that initiative for the Real-Time Information Center that will make us more effective and ensure constitutional policing with an intelligence-led approach. We need to re-examine our priorities to ensure that they properly align with the budget, because we need to anticipate that there are going to be some difficulties, some challenges moving forward financially for the city and subsequently for the department. And then we need to come up with a strategic plan. I know a lot of chiefs don't like to deal with strategic plans because it kind of locks you in and it doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility. Well, I think we need to come up with a strategic plan and then determine how we can become flexible in the future when crises might interrupt or disrupt what those plans are. But we definitely need to lead in a direction that we can all get on board with and that meets the needs of the community.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Wilson.
Could you repeat the question, sir?
Yes. What will be your main focus as the new chief of police in the first 6 to 12 months? What is your vision for the Aurora Police Department?
So next week will be my 6-month mark as the interim chief of police here, and I believe I hit the ground running because this department was in a crisis and we were in turmoil, and there was a loss of trust in this community. Prior to anything happening with the reform, the police, the call to action reform that's being called across the nation, we had our own major issues, and we had our own case here with Elijah McClain. So I started, first of all, dealing with the Nate Meyer incident and trying to firm up those directives because no one's above the law, and making sure that we don't go an internal affairs route, which issues garrity, and then those evidence can't be used in a court or criminal case, that we make sure that we look at things criminally first and hold them to that criminal standard prior to moving on to an internal affairs standard. So I made that change almost immediately when I took over. Also, in the Elijah McClain case, our body-worn cameras came off, and that's unacceptable. There is issues with technology, and there's issues with products that are being made out there. And so I had asked, with permission of Nick Metz, I asked our ESS lieutenant to ask that group, ask Taser, for the best retention system they had, no matter what it cost, and we were approved to go ahead and purchase those. That we then did a we then did a demonstration to make sure that that was the best thing that we could possibly do. I made that mandatory that each and every officer wear that retention system. I also have made, obviously, as soon as the state bill came out, I changed the duty to intervene directive. I have the suspicious call directive. I have an officer relief directive, which allows us to de-escalate a situation sooner by having officers come in and remove that individual that may have been in that altercation and allow another officer to take over so that that officer can de-escalate and hopefully we can not have any further issues.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Moore.
So there's three primary things that I would look at initially. One is personnel, two is processes, and three is technology. So when you think about personnel, it's not just staffing, which is important, but it's how you actually deploy your officers based on community need, based on crime trends, et cetera. Also, personnel is important because they have to have clear directives as far as expectations from the chief of police, which would be me, and I would make sure that they would be equipped with that. Number two, policies. You have to make sure that your policies are current and best practices, use of force, vehicle chases, foot pursuits, all the things that law enforcement is being required to reform now. I said in an earlier interview that a lot of these things have been embedded in policing as far as the duty to intervene. I would like to believe that most agencies do that. Now it's written down, so it's mandated, but I don't think that's too much to ask for. I think that's a very realistic expectation from the community. Likewise, the way that we engage the community when you talk about policy, you have to remember that they have constitutional rights. Whenever you stop someone, that's based on the Fourth Amendment, and officers need to be aware of that, as well as the community. When you talk about policy, you also want to bring the community in and get their input as to the best practices as it relates to law enforcement. Third is technology. That's important because it allows you to do intelligent-led policing. It allows you to do pinpoint crime agendas, and it also allows every officer the opportunity to have a body-worn camera which protects them as well as the citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question comes out of a town hall meeting in Ward 4. It says, describe a significant crisis management event you were involved with and how you responded. And we'll start with candidate Wilson.
So, one more time, sir, with the question.
Yeah. Describe a significant crisis management event you were involved with and how you responded.
So the first thing that obviously comes to mind for me was the COVID-19 pandemic. There's not a rule book for that. There's not a rule book for that across the nation. And that was a crisis for this city, for this police department, and how I was going to protect my officers, as well as protect the citizens and limit their exposure that my officers maybe were bringing into their home. Everyone in this nation was scrambling for PPE, personal protective equipment for their officers. We had to quickly figure out how to reduce our workforce for those that were not out there responding for calls. And I also needed to try and reduce the officers' exposure. And so we went to a modified schedule. We were scrambling for PPE. We were scrambling for decontamination. We started decontaminating our buildings and our cars on a weekly basis with our narcotics unit, doing that themselves. And I'm proud of that, and I'm proud, and God forbid I'm knocking on wood, that this doesn't have a resurgence in our community, and that we don't have to face that again at the level that we were. I did have positive officers that were positive for COVID-19, and thank God they were able to make it through. And so that was a crisis that I recently dealt with, and I feel that I did it appropriately, professionally, and I did it with the care and concern for my officers.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Moore.
Could you repeat that for me, please?
Absolutely. Describe a significant crisis management event you were involved with and how you responded.
So July 7th of 2016, Dallas was under attack by a lone gunman. He shot and killed 5 Dallas officers 4 specific Dallas police officers and 1 DART officer. That night, I was the SWAT commander, so we had to respond to that situation, and we had to resolve it as quickly and as safely as we could. I'm convinced that the decision that I made that night was the right decision. I'm convinced that had it not have been made, the gunman would have killed more officers. We lost 5 officers, but again, I think we would have lost more. He was shooting in the crowd, so there were several people that were injured, civilians as well as police officers, and I regret that whole situation, but I do take some comfort in knowing that it could have been much, much worse, and as a SWAT commander, we were able to resolve it.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones.
So in 2014, we had an active shooter at one of our high schools in Baltimore County. Our officers responded. I apparently was the commander on the scene at the time. The subject actually had a shotgun that he broke down and brought into the school. He was able to put the shotgun together in the bathroom, and he made his way into the cafeteria. The great thing is we had an SRO that was at the school, and he was able to disarm the subject before he was able to, but the subject shot several rounds, but the officer was able to disarm him before he actually hurt anybody at the school. The response is, I think, was sort of horrific for the students. We had to make sure that we had our crisis intervention team at the school that day, but for several weeks just to make sure the kids were okay. Also, that day, we actually had to do a media release, just letting everybody know about the transparency and talk about the incident. And we, as a community, felt that officer-involved shooting or the active shooter for several years to come. So, good thing having the SROs in school was a major thing for us. And I think without that, we could have actually had more people injured. So, thank you.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley.
So what comes to mind is actually 2 different incidents. One is the case of a missing little girl, Erin A. Thompson. I served as the police spokesperson when we were treating the case initially as a missing child report. At some point, the case had transitioned to a homicide investigation, a child death investigation, and continued to assist with managing the public release of information and working with many of our partners across city departments with how that crisis was managed. I then later ended up promoting and being a crimes against children investigator, where I got direct involvement with participating in interviews of some of the surviving children, which then netted a case that led to Erin Thompson being arrested for Erin A's death. The second incident involved one we talked about earlier, and that's the Elijah McClain case. Again, I'm not able to go into a lot of details about the case, but I will say that I made a determination, a decision to do something that had not been done before with regards to having that victim-centered approach and working directly with the family. Yes, that is something that, as the commander of the Investigations Bureau, I could have tasked out to our victims advocate to be the sole persons involved. But I felt a personal connection with the family and ended up working with them directly. And despite their frustrations right now, which I completely understand, I would not have changed the approach or interaction with them. I wish we could have had a different outcome.
Thank you. All right, next question. The Aurora Police Department recently implemented several policy changes, including a ban on carotid control holds, a duty to intervene directly for police who witness wrongdoing, and changes to how officers respond to reports of suspicious persons. Do you support these changes, and what other directive changes would you like to see? And let's start with Officer Dudley. Candidate Dudley.
Yes, I support the changes. I think that we need to look further into our use of force policies. I think that we need to consider, and this is a proposal that I would put forward to city leadership, that we consider allowing the department to work directly with our Aurora Detention Center and having a jail van that goes out and picks up folks that have been arrested. And I think the benefits there is some internal policies that were implemented. The duty to intervene law is one aspect that also has become a policy. But another portion of that within our department is that we now have a tap-out policy. And the reason why is that requires officers to get a break if situations are escalated. Well, I think it's equally challenging to say if you end up taking someone into custody, it's a good chance you're likely to come into that kind of confrontation. And so having a jail van, experts who know how to do prisoner transports, come and pick prisoners up or arrestees up, is probably a much better approach than requiring the arresting officer to stay full-time with the person they arrested for the ride to the jail, for the processing, when we may be able to do a more efficient, more streamlined approach. So that would be another area that I would look at trying to make a change.
Thank you. Same question for Candidate Jones.
Thank you. Yes, I actually wholeheartedly support the changes that were made. No chokehold. I don't think that there is a need for a chokehold in policing today. I guess the ability to intervene when an officer is doing wrong, I believe that we, as police officers, should support that. Because if someone is actually breaking the law or violating someone's right, I think that we should have that duty to step in, to tap them on the shoulder, saying, hey, take a step back, let me finish this lockup for you, to slow things down so that we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're actually either taking a life or being sued. So here it is, when you start talking about looking at other policies and changes that may occur, if you got to start looking at how other agencies across the country were part of dissent decrees, what areas were, that caused them to be a part of the dissent decree. And I think that's when you start looking at your policies. And as I said before, those three areas, the use of force, the illegal arrest, and those bias stops, is not going to change unless we actually change our policies and change how we are training our people. I think that when you start looking at policies, there are definitely best practices out there, and you just have to find a policy that makes sense for the Aurora Police Department, and I will make sure I find that policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next candidate, Moore.
Yes, sir. Like with the other two candidates, I completely support it. I'm actually shocked to some extent because we haven't taught a chokehold in Dallas since 2004. And at the time we made that change, that was considered best practices. So I was actually shocked that agencies still had that practice. Number two, the duty to intervene. I was taught that almost 30 years ago. It wasn't written down, so it wasn't a policy. It's really a humanity perspective. Every officer knows when another officer is going too far. So it's sad that we're at a point that we had to actually put it in writing, but I think police officers understand that, and I don't think you'll get any pushback from that. As far as the warning before you shoot, again, I was taught that almost 30 years ago. I would like to believe that every police department utilize best practices in that regard. If not, then I welcome it as well. The thing that I would focus on is use of force, like my other two candidates have already mentioned. I think that's important. I think we've done a poor job in law enforcement as it relates to de-escalation, what that really looks like and how we can actually utilize that for officer safety as well as community safety. So I would like to see that expanded. It should be more than just a box that we check. It should be something that we practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Wilson.
Yes, sir. I would like to, first of all, I appreciate that the panel agrees with the directives that I authored and that I put into place in the city of Aurora. The two new directives, the suspicious calls as well as the officer relief, were new, and then us documenting the warning shots before shooting, the banning of the carotid control hold, as well as the duty to intervene. We were already training on that. We were already doing that. We were just getting ahead of the state law that I knew was coming down. So I want to make it clear that I'm glad that they appreciate those directives, and there's further work that needs to be done. Again, I'm looking forward to working with the Community Task Force, looking at best practices across the nation, the Major City Chiefs Association, as well as having our community have a voice in how we police them, because we work for them. I believe that the hobble is something that we need to look at again across the nation of the use in that. And 2 weeks ago, Officer Virgil Major, who was just assigned to the task force, came forward with that very directive that Commander Dudley brought up. And I've already presented that to the Deputy City Manager as well as Community Relations, saying we need to work on this. And I've assigned him as a Community Relations Officer. So that'll be his sole project, is to build relationships in this community and look at how and research how we can do things better.
Thank you. Next question. How will each candidate establish trust within the department and demonstrate support for officers and civilian personnel in light of police employees not feeling supported by the community? And we'll start with, candidate Moore.
So as it relates to internally, when you think about 21st century policing, legitimacy and trust, you have to first build that inside your department, whether it's sworn, non-sworn, police officer, or civilians. And you do that by sitting down and you listen and you learn, you watch and you learn. Officers many times just want to have a voice, and they want to understand or want the leadership to understand that their voice is important to them. So I would listen to them. I would listen to their perspective, and then I would give them what I consider the true perspective, which is this. The community does not hate police officers. They hate some of the tactics that have been used against certain minority groups throughout the country. But everybody expects to be safe in their community. They expect to be safe in their homes. So the majority of all public does support the police department. We just have to do a better job with transparency and accountability, and those are fair expectations. So that's where I would start. I think police officers need to know that they are valued, that this is a noble profession, it's an honorable profession, and sometimes they just need to be reminded of that. And I find this to be helpful, to say thank you to them sometimes for what they do, because many times they believe that people forget that they're people too. We have some of the same issues that the community has, the exact same, and sometimes that's not recognized. So I would give them that forum to talk to me one-on-one as a group and really listen to their concerns and listen to the community's concerns and bridge that gap.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Wilson.
Could you repeat the question, please, sir?
Yes. How will each candidate establish trust within the department and demonstrate support for officers and civilian personnel in light of police employees not feeling supported by the community?
So again, I have been at the helm now for 6 months, and we have been experiencing this low morale, this mistrust within the community, and trying to battle that back, trying to start healing in this community. And the officers know that I'm in the trenches with them. They understand that I support them. I support their mental health. I support them in the job that they do, because we do have a professional agency. Can we do better? Absolutely. We should always be looking at doing better. We should always be looking at our directives and changing those directives. But these officers know, I think for me, they know, and they get the messages from me of support, and they know that I have their back as far as supporting them in the professional job that they do. And I also say that I've hit the reset button, and those officers that don't want to obey the rules, that don't have the honor to just wear the Aurora police patch or the Aurora badge, I will get rid of them, and I have gotten rid of them.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley.
So I believe that the members of the police department are seeking what the members in our community are asking for, and that's basically procedural justice. I think they're tired of having administrators dictate what the policies should be without sitting down with them and getting some input, the ability for them to be able to be heard. And then they want to understand what the rules are. So as administrators, we share with our employees exactly what the concerns are that the citizens have, and why the way that we're doing things aren't working, and why there's a better approach that's needed. Once we've had that communication and we're ready to make a decision, and you've explained how the decision's going to be made, people want to know that you actually did really care when they provided you that input. And if you provide them those things, that's what we call procedural justice. And I think the members of the organization want that as just as much as our citizens do. How we get there as administrators is we've got to be present. We've got to be accountable. We have to be out there to be able to see what they do. And that means that, yes, we have to probably put some time on our schedule for the people that we work alongside, to attend briefings, to be able to stand there and be accountable to them when they have questions or concerns, to be able to send out memorandums that explain to them how whatever the new issue is. I think that has to be a priority. Speaking of priorities, we need to go through in the Aurora Police Department a reprioritization process. We haven't done that for some time. And it's time that we do it by including our stakeholders, which includes the members of our organization, both civilian and sworn, and get an idea about the direction this department needs to go, and be able to then align our budgets to move in that direction. It's through that reprioritization that we're going to all understand what the rules of engagement are, what the policies will be, and what training will look like.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones.
If you don't mind, can you just repeat it so I have it all?
Absolutely. How will each candidate establish trust within the department and demonstrate support for officers and civilian personnel in light of police employees not feeling supported by the community?
Thank you. So as a new chief coming in, I think it's just building relationships building a relationship with the officers inside the agency or the members inside the agency is almost about the same as building relationships outside the agency. So here's where I would start first. I would start with transparency. I think we have to be transparent to our people. We have to be vulnerable. We have to make sure that we are giving them true direction and sharing information with them. And the sharing information starts with just simple communication. I think that a lot of the issues that the lack of support is because they don't understand the direction that the agency is going. The second point I would make is that we have, as leaders of an agency, we have to make sure that we are respecting our officers. Because I know that we asked them to go out into the community and respect the community, but listen, we have to make sure that we're respecting them first. Because I think once they understand that we respect them and that we care about them, they'll go out and do the job, and they'll do it very well. The third thing is the engagement piece. We have to make sure that we're really truly engaging our officers. We have to get, as a manager, I would get to the roll calls. I would get to roll calls. I would go on these traffic stops just so that I can actually be a part of the traffic and just be a part of the officers, and so that they can understand that as a leader, I really truly care about them. And the third thing is, listen, each of these officers have families. When you're approaching these officers, yeah, I should ask them about their families and about what's going on in their life. I think those things are so important, because once the officer know how much you really truly care about them, then that's when they'll know that you really truly care. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder again, if someone listening has questions, you can do so by submitting them to auroragov.org/policechieftownhall. And if you don't have access that way, you can call in to 303-739-6956. If you're a Spanish speaker, the meeting is being simultaneously interpreted into Spanish on Comcast Channel 881. Moving on to the next question. Do you believe we have a problem within politics and policing as a whole with systematic racism and sexism? And if so, how are you, as a product of police training, going to work beyond that training and make changes? And we'll start with candidate Jones.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yes. Do you believe we have a problem within politics and policing as a whole with systematic racism and sexism? And if so, how are you, as a product of police training, going to work beyond that training to make changes?
Thank you. So, yes, I would say yes, there is an issue with racism and sexism. If you look at a police agency, we are a representation of the community that we serve. Unfortunately, there is racism and sexism in our society, and we can't change that unless, we can't change that. But the things that we can change inside the organization is to make sure that we have sound policy in place so that we have a zero tolerance for racism and sexism. That policy should or has to be enforced, and once we have that policy in place, if someone violates that policy, unfortunately, we have to make sure that we are disciplining them, and I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question, candidate Dudley?
The easy answer is yes, absolutely, that there are bias in all walks of life. I think that it's important to be able to try to work to and train to try to minimize or reduce or eliminate those bias. But I think that it would be disingenuous for me to sit here and tell you that that is something that could be done simply from within the police department. Since we're talking about being the chief of police, it's absolutely going to take citizen involvement and us having that constant engagement. It's going to take outside trainers to come in and help us to recognize that these biases can start to build up and exist over time. And what can we do to try to develop our capacity to eliminate those biases and to be able to still perform our job in a way that's, that provides equity and fairness. And that's the part that we got to get to, is really what does that training look like, and begin to implement that.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Wilson?
Yes, sir. Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Absolutely. Do you believe we have a problem within politics and policing as a whole with systematic racism and sexism? And if so, how are you, as a product of police training, going to work beyond that training to make changes?
So absolutely, I agree that there's an issue throughout this nation, not only in police work but also in politics. We've had one African American president, and we still haven't had the ability to have a female candidate that was successful. So how do I deal with that? When I took over in this job, I realized that racism is a problem in this community, and implicit bias is a problem in this community. I reached out to Omar Montgomery, the NAACP. He gave me a contact. I already contracted with Dr. Brenda J. Allen to come in and give implicit bias training to my executive staff. She met with us already. We've done a survey, and we've got a plan to move forward on how we put this training throughout the police department. I'm also working with Director Janice Napper, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she is hoping to bring that training to the entire city and the city employees. so that when we're bringing customer service, that we're all looking at the implicit bias that we all have. I will say that this is an issue, and we can't just have a video play. We can't just have someone come and talk. This needs to be interactive. We need to have our officers take a good look at themselves, take some of the actual tests that are out there that gauge your implicit bias, and look at yourself within. And then once you recognize it and you're able to accept it, that's when you can change it. When you talk about sexism, I am the first female division chief in the city of Aurora, and I'm hoping that the community is ready to break that glass ceiling and allow me to continue to run this agency.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Moore.
Yes, absolutely. I think you have to be willing to have those hard conversations as it relates to ethnicity, and you have to start from history. Policing did not come from Sir Robert Peel, as we give credit. Policing in America was designed for slaves and their capture, and that's the whole point of policing. It was slave patrol. So we have to be willing to have real-life conversation that's based on true history and not history that's been made up for convenience. The Declaration of Independence, the most important line is, we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men were created equal. And until we get to where all men are created equal and women, we will continue to have this century-long discussion and argument. So absolutely, there is a problem, systemic racism. There is a problem with genderism, sexism, however you want to label it. The problem is, it should be no longer a problem. It's ridiculous that in 2020, we're still having the same argument because people are afraid to have real-life discussions based on truths. And I'm not afraid to have those discussions, and I welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question. Everyone has had difficult choices to make. In your law enforcement career, what was the most difficult decision you had to make, and how did you handle it? And we'll start with candidate Wilson.
The most difficult decision that I had to make is to stand up within the organization several times throughout my career, knowing that I was going to be shot down, knowing that I had these grandiose ideas of that we need to treat the people that are experiencing homelessness in this community as people and not trash, and they need to be served by this police department. And I was told that that wasn't our job, and that was mission creep. I had to stand up, and that was the hardest decision I had, is to go against the people that were my bosses and to let myself be heard. And I continue to do that, and I will continue to fight for the mentally ill in this community. I will continue to fight for those that are struggling with opioid addiction, and making sure that if we redirect how police this community, we need to make sure that we have 24/7, 365 people able to deal with the people that are dealing with mental illness and people that are homeless in this community. And so, knowing that could have blackballed me, and I think I lost some jobs. Perhaps I wasn't picked for special assignments because I was seen as uppity, if you will, and that I would speak up when I saw something wrong. So that was the hardest decision, to have that administrative bravery to speak up.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Moore.
The most difficult decision I haven't had to make yet. I've made many decisions. I believe that I'm a good decision maker, but I don't think I've made one that was difficult. I believe in my training, I believe in my mentors, and I believe in doing the right thing. So I hadn't been faced with something that was so difficult that I could recall. I think every decision that I've made, I've been able to support, and if it turned out to be the wrong decision, I'm strong enough to say I was wrong. So I can't really recall one that was so difficult that I could tell you about. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones.
I would have to agree with Assistant Chief Moore. I think that, as a leader, the decisions that we make on a daily basis shouldn't be very, very difficult, especially if we have a moral compass guiding us. So I can give you an example that I had to deal with. We had an officer. It was a foot pursuit. The gentleman laid down on the ground and he gave up. Unfortunately, one of our officers came up and kicked him in the face. When I saw the video, I was kind of infuriated that, this gentleman has given up, but we still used unnecessary force on him, or actually brutal force on him. He busted his whole side of his face. He had to go to the hospital. And when I saw that, I was on vacation at the time, and when I got back, the decision was made not to charge the officer, and that was made by the chief. And I went to the chief and I said, Chief, we can't have this. I said, what message would we be sending our officers if we actually allowed this officer to use brute force and we did nothing about it? Unfortunately, I had to keep pushing the issue with the chief. Finally, he agreed with me, and we sent it over to the state's attorney's office just so that they can look at it. The state's attorney agreed, and actually they charged the officer. I just think that when we're dealing with citizens on a regular basis, we should make sure that we're treating them fairly and that we're not using force that is unnecessary. So, as I said before, the decision wasn't difficult because I know what's right, and I know what's right morally. And so that was probably a decision that had to be made.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley.
So for me, there's constant challenges to what is the right thing to do when you're in law enforcement. And that brings about a feeling of the decision being difficult, even though you know it was right. I've had those experiences both professionally and also personally. And I think that as long as you can stay grounded in what the other candidates have said, as long as you can stay grounded in knowing that you make decisions for the right reasons, you can live with yourself and you can accept the fact that although it was difficult, it was the right thing to do.
Okay, the next question is a long one, but the real meat of the question is the last sentence. I am a lifelong Aurora resident and former volunteer with Aurora PD Victim Advocate. Our community has been in the national spotlight for tragedy, and we are a resilient and powerful community that cares for one another. It has been disturbing in the past several years to see our department engagement become more negative. Our police department is not exempt from national issues causing people to call for defunding the police, shifting to more effective interventions for people facing crisis. Here's the real gist of the question. If you were faced with a significant budget reduction, what changes would you make? And we'll start with candidate Dudley.
Well, I knew when I applied for the position, especially after coming out of the COVID, that many communities across the country are going to be experiencing hardship financially. We're not absolved from that living in the community of Aurora. We see circumstances out there where there's 40 million people without jobs. We see businesses that are closing. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a financial analyst to recognize that we're a sales tax-based community. And because of that, we're going to end up having to make some serious decisions going forward. And that's why, as I said earlier, we really need to sit down and we need to identify what our priorities are. And that means that our stakeholders need to come to the table. Folks both inside the organization and outside the organization, and city leadership. We need to sit down and we need to figure out what should the Aurora Police Department's priorities be. And then we need to align our budget to match up with those priorities. And then from there, we need to get out and talk to folks about how decisions were made and what those impacts look like. We need to be realists. and that is that the police department budget is about 87% salaries. So with that 13%, there's not a whole lot of room to cut pens and paper to be able to cut enough for what we might have to experience. And that's why we have to together decide what those priorities look like and what our mission is going forward. I think that our folks internally would appreciate knowing that direction and how decisions were made and that we cared what they thought. And I think the community would appreciate the fact that we recognize we need to be more efficient.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones.
Thank you. This is my thought. Usually when we are cutting budget, the first place that we look to cut is training. What I say is that should be the last place, because I think training is one of the most important things that we do as an agency. Those things, when we train well and we have a well-trained workforce, it limits our risks or our risk management. It actually improves morale in the organization, especially when officers are being trained and they're getting some extra training. It builds morale. So that will be the last place that we're looking at of cutting the budget. But what we'd have to do is actually look at the priorities of the agency and also the priorities of the city and try to figure out which direction that they're going. There are some areas that maybe that we shouldn't be doing, or in terms of services that we're providing. I love the idea of us partner up with one officer and clinician. I love that idea. But when we start talking about other issues like some other areas, such as should our officers be responding to these mental illness calls where someone is just looking for medication, I think we should be able to try to start farming those calls to the health department or the social services. But I just think that when we're talking about cutting funding, we just have to make sure that we're doing it in a sensible approach so that we're not actually limiting the services to the citizens of Aurora.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Moore.
Yes, so there's three things that came to memory. One would be officers responding to mental health calls. I don't believe officers are qualified, nor are they trained properly to even address those type of calls. Number one, officers aren't medical people. They're not doctors, and sometimes we give police too much, and that's one of the things that I think officers would be willing to give up. I think that the people that have the expertise, medical staff people, should respond to those calls and call police only if needed. So that would be one area. Second area is animal control. Again, I don't think officers should respond to animal complaints. If it is criminal, again, they should be called in and respond to that, but they shouldn't be assigned that duty because that's not what police are really made for. Number three would be homelessness. It's a problem throughout the nation, but it's not against the law to be homeless. So why we send police there, I really don't understand that. So that would be something that I'd be willing to give up as well. So if that's called defunding the police, I think police officers would be okay with that, and that just makes sense. A lot of times when we send police to these type of calls, we actually make that call go up when it could possibly just stay real civil and calm. But our presence is one of authority, and many times that causes excitement, and then police have to respond. So I think it's better that they're not even be there, police officers, and respond when needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Wilson.
Sir, could you just read the last sentence of that question,
Yes.
please?
If you were faced with a significant budget reduction, what changes would you make?
Okay, and so again, I have been asked by city management to present with my executive staff a 3%, 5%, and 10% cut for the next coming years, because we have taken a huge hit due to COVID-19. I think we were at last budget meeting, we were at a $45 million shortfall that is projected. So therefore, the police department has to be good partners with the other directors and the other community aspects of the community and how we serve our community. We aren't the only person that has to utilize these funds. So, but I also want to caution us going backwards. We have made so much progress in the crisis response team that we have in place in dealing with having a co-responder model where a therapist goes out with an officer. The therapist is leading the way on that call, but then that safety net is right there and available. These take specially trained officers. They take the people that actually care and want to do the work. So when we talk about defunding police, I think what people are talking about, as my comrades here have talked about, as far as redirecting what calls for service the police department is responsible for. But what I don't want to see in the city of Aurora is, unless we're going to have mental health folks that are actually on duty 24/7, 365 days a year, then this isn't going to work. Because at 2 a.m., when that person's having that suicidal call or having hallucinations or having some sort of schizophrenic breakdown, or a family's calling because their autistic child is having an emergency, we can't wait a half an hour for people to respond. So the police will have to respond. So my point is, let's make sure that we get more of these co-responder models here in the city of Aurora so they do have 24/7 coverage and that we're able to deal with that. So in my budget cuts, even my 10% cut, I did not cut any existing position that I have now. Our sworn personnel our non-sworn personnel, without them we can't do business. We need people to transcribe those reports. We need our dispatchers. We need people in order to collect the evidence at a crime scene and the property. So in my cuts, what I've said is it will delay Academy. Maybe we go without Academy a couple times so that we delay that funding down the road.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support civilian oversight committees that are given all relevant data in regards to an investigation, and how would you make sure that that process is open and transparent to the public? And let's start with candidate Moore.
So yes, I do. I believe in transparency, and that's really the definition of transparency. Having the community be involved in the process, I wouldn't be opposed to. I would welcome that. I think we live in a time of reform in policing when that's absolutely necessary. It's something that my boss, Chief Renee Hall, started in Dallas, and it seems to work. They have a moderator. We give the moderator the information. She takes it back to the committee. They do their investigation, and then they give that investigation with recommendations to Chief Hall. So I don't have a problem with it. We've already done it, and I would welcome that here. Thank you.
Same question for candidate Wilson.
Yes, sir. I have, from the moment I took over, I've been in conversations with Mayor Pro Tem Johnson and other council members. I'm absolutely for the community having a voice, because I feel as though they don't think they've had a voice, and we need to change that. The community members have a right to weigh in on how we police them and how we act, and the practices and procedures that we have in the city of Aurora and the Aurora Police Department. So I'm absolutely looking forward to working with that task force and getting down to business as soon as possible. Since I've been the interim chief, I have reinvigorated the independent review board that was very rarely used, where citizens come in and can look at discipline cases and have a say in how those discipline cases have evolved. And so this will be our third case will be going to IRB here. So in 3 months, of course, COVID has stopped some of the progress there, but I believe the citizens need to have a voice. I welcome them to come in and look at our use of force, be a part of our use of force board. I welcome them to come in and look at our discipline, our chief's review board, when we're looking at discipline and being a part of those solutions. And we shouldn't have anything to hide. If we're doing it right, let's open the door and let them in.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley.
As was said by Vanessa Wilson, absolutely. We already do in the Internal Affairs Bureau provide investigative materials, data to the Independent Review Board, which is not all civilian, but there are 4 civilians on it and 4 sworn members that are on the board that looks into what the allegations were, how the investigation was ran, and then comes up with some recommended outcomes for the chief's office. So it's not something that we're not already doing, but in a new format that will possibly roll out of the task force, it's understandable that that would continue in some sort of way.
Thank you. Same question, Candidate Jones.
Yes, I absolutely agree with the Oversight Review Board. I think the community has a right to make sure that our investigations are complete, thorough, and accurate. I think that if we're going to do an oversight review, I think that they should even also possibly have subpoena rights so that they can actually make sure that they can subpoena people to their so that they can actually look at the investigation from all sides and making sure that they can get the information that they need. And I think that would be a more of a sound approach. So that way, it's not just the police policing themselves, and they can just actually make sure that they are part of our process and reviewing everything that we're doing, just for the transparency purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question actually came in via the phone line tonight. What are your plans for improvement in the area of mental health training for officers, as mental health is an issue officers have to deal with when out in the community? And let's start with Candidate Jones.
So what we do in Baltimore County, and I think that we do it very well, we've been doing, we've had this crisis or mobile crisis response team for 21 years, where we actually pair up an officer with a clinician, and we've been doing it for 21 years, and we do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But one area that I think that we are kind of missing the boat on, and I think if we can actually look at training all of our officers in crisis intervention training, I think putting them through that 40-hour training, I think it's necessary, because who knows when you're going to come across somebody that is in a mental crisis. And if we're not making sure that our officers are trained in that area, what that actually could possibly lead to is officers putting ourselves in a negative situation where we have to use force, and we're just trying to make sure that we avoid that altogether. Thank you.
Same question for Candidate Dudley.
Former Chief of Police Nick Metz had already implemented with the Aurora Police Department having mental health training done for all of our officers, and primarily the responsibility was to get the uniformed officers, the patrol officers, trained first. That would continue. That would not change. I think that we also, kind of echoing something that has come out earlier when it comes to efficiencies, probably need to look at another model when it comes to addressing mental health, and that is not necessarily expecting that it always needs to be addressed by officers, but that we actually have a mental health practitioner up in dispatch, working out of the communications center to triage calls for service as they come in. Because oftentimes there's many other programs out there. I know Aurora Mental Health has one. But I can tell you that if a person is in crises, they are more likely to call 911 than the hotline that's offered by Aurora Mental Health. So to have the ability to be able to have a practitioner triage when the call comes in, if it's really not something police should respond to, is another way for us to address the mental health crises that we have in our community. But we still need to do training for officers as well, and that should continue.
Thank you. Same question for Candidate Wilson.
Could you repeat the question, sir?
Absolutely. What are your plans for improvement in the area of mental health training for officers, as mental health is an issue officers have to deal with when out in the community?
I believe, and Commander Dudley touched on it perfectly under Chief Metz, he made it a mandate that our patrol officers all go through the CIT training. So we brought that training in-house, and our CRT team is actually responsible, working and partnering with the Aurora Mental Health Center to get that training done. By doing it in-house, we were able to double the amount of officers we could get through that training in a year. Before, it was perhaps we could get 5 officers to that training, and by doing it ourselves in-house, we were able to get 20 to 25 officers, so 50 a year through that training, as we did it twice a year. Obviously, with that, we're going to need, our crisis response team gets advanced training on that. And like I said before, I don't want to go backwards in how we respond to mental health calls. It's an issue. And until we have something in place, let's not throw out what we're doing now. Let's continue it. Let's keep training our officers on crisis intervention so they can call for that David unit, which is our crisis response team, or they are at least knowledgeable enough that they can recognize that someone is having a crisis, whether it be mental health or some sort of drug reaction or something, so they can identify those crises and get fire rescue en route. And then if, like I said, a crisis response team person is on, that we get those people dealing with that issue. It's something that we can't ignore. I think it's a situation across the nation that we have to address, and I think that's something that needs to be done soon.
Thank you. Same question, Candidate Moore.
So as I stated earlier, I'm not 100% convinced that mental health is something that police are the most effective group to handle. However, if we had to continue to handle it, agreeing with the rest of my colleagues here, training is the key. I think we need to train more than at a basic level. We'd really have to create a team of subject matter experts that could really identify those medical issues that are being revealed. And if we're willing to do that as a police department, then I think that would make us better equipped to deal with mental health issues. If not, again, I would be an advocate to give that to the experts so that the proper remedy would be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question, and this comes out of a town hall meeting in Ward 2. What is the most unique or creative idea you have to help reduce crime that you've ever come up with? And let's start with Candidate Wilson.
Say it one more time.
Yeah. What is the most unique or creative idea to help reduce crime that you have ever come up with?
So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I have come up with an idea. I can say that we have looked at best practices across the nation. I think the candidates up here have talked about using technology as a way of like predictive analysis. So myself coming up with a specific idea, a creative idea, I'm not going to sit here and make one up right now on the spot. But I think we need to have the communication with the citizens of what their ideas of, how they want to be policed and what their ideas are and how we can reduce crime in our communities. I think by reducing crime, we also have to build that trust and have people feel that they can call the police and report the crime, first of all. And so I'm really working on building those relationships and rebuilding that trust. But again, I haven't come up with some creative way. If I had, I would make $1 million because I would sell it across the nation.
Thank you. Same question for Candidate Moore.
Could you repeat it for me, please?
Absolutely. What is the most unique or creative idea to help reduce crime that you have ever come up with?
So I don't really know that it's unique or very creative, but I find that if you ask officers, the ones that are actually going to do the work, for a strategic plan, you will be blown away with their ideas. I've done that and I've been blown away. Officers know how to fight crime. They know it better than anyone. And you need to ask the community. As Vanessa said, the community has ways to fight crime. I believe that crime is everyone's business, and we have to collaborate together to effectively make that change. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for Candidate Jones.
I would have to agree with the other two panelists. I think that, in policing, we usually try to find ways that other agencies are fighting crime, and we just reuse it and emulate it. But here's what I will say, is that what I would bring here to Aurora is an evidence-based policing strategy, which has been scientifically proved that it works, and it's called data-driven approach to crime and traffic safety. It's looking at accidents and also looking at your crime and doing a deep dive analysis of exactly what's occurring in those areas. And then you lay them on top of a mapping where you can find out where your hot spots are and where your crime is occurring, what time of day and these crimes are occurring. And I think that if you can actually get your officers to focus in those areas and, and focus on those areas and when the times crimes are occurring and the times they are, I think we'll be very, very effective in fighting crime here in Aurora.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Dudley.
So I think that we would all echo that, one of the things that is important for a chief to do is to be able to recognize that they need to stay plugged in with what's going on around the country and around the world when it comes to law enforcement, because there are many, many best practices that come out of that process. I like the old adage that you don't know what you don't know. And so I will always give attribution when I pick up something from somewhere else, and the idea of the Real-Time Information Center was something that I learned about from out of California as an innovative way to be able to approach reducing crime. I think that that's something that's new to Aurora, and so, yeah, I can take credit for that particular idea as being a creative approach to reduce crime. It's an approach that will make us more efficient. It will take workload off of the officers to hopefully provide more time for them to be able to interact and engage with our community members. So I think that we all would say that there's best practices out there we need to stay in tune with. I would continue to do that, but the Real-Time Information Center is what I think we need here.
Thank you. All right, next question. Would you support demilitarizing the police department by returning military-style weapons and vehicles and refusing to accept new ones? And we'll start with candidate Dudley.
So I wondered what that meant, because a council member had asked me about that earlier during interviews today. Are we talking about not making sure that we have the necessary resources to be able to take on a challenging situation without further loss of life? And if we're using the equipment appropriately, would it make sense for us to keep that equipment but desensitize people to it, so that at special events, when our SWAT team or our K-9 unit shows up and they're teaching and they're working with the children, be able to bring that equipment out so that it doesn't look like the only time people see it is when the police department wants to utilize it to intimidate people. So I'm not quite sure that I would be willing to get rid of all the tools. In Aurora, we're not immune from having tragedy. And I think that we have to be conscientious of the fact that when you need your folks to do enforcement activities, you want them to be well equipped so that we don't damage officer safety, so that we don't damage the safety of the community, and so that we don't decrease response times because we don't have the adequate equipment that could have gone in to save people. And so I think we need to be very careful. But yeah, if we have stuff that really it doesn't serve a purpose other than to intimidate, it's probably something we shouldn't maintain. It's costly to maintain that stuff.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Jones.
When you're talking about demilitarizing the organization, I think you have to take a step back and take a real good look and try to take a sensible approach to it. Maybe when the officers are out doing community policing or out in the community, maybe they shouldn't have on military fatigues or the uniforms that may look intimidating. But far as getting rid of getting rid of the APC or the Bearcat, those are very essential pieces of equipment, especially when you're talking about a barricade situation. I can't express enough from being the commander of operations how the Bearcat has assisted me in making sure that we brought a barricade to a positive resolution, which we're, in not using force. So I think that we have to take a sensible approach in making sure that when we're doing that, we're looking at all of the equipment and not just the things that we're talking about for military. So I just think that we can't get rid of everything just because we're in a crisis in the country about policing. I think we just have to step back and take a sensible approach to it.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Moore.
So as Mr. Dudley said, I really don't understand what that means because the police department is not outfitted with military equipment. They're outfitted with equipment that they need to respond to bad guys who have upgraded their equipment. For example, heavy vest, helmets, that's in direct response to bad guys having automatic weapons as far as AK-47s, etc. APCs are utilized by SWAT very effectively. They're not used solely just to intimidate. They're used to transport SWAT to situations that they need to be at. On a community engagement piece, it's in high demand. I've done a lot of community relation events, and the APC is highly demanded by the community. Kids love it. They love to tour it. They love to go through it. They love to sit in it. They love to take pictures with SWAT officers. So I really don't understand what that means. I know that equipment that officers have, they don't have it just to have. They have it because they need it. So I wouldn't support officers having to give that up because as Mr. Jones said, and Mr. Dudley for that matter, is we have crisis. We have people that want to do bad things to officers and to innocent people, and officers need those tools to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for candidate Wilson.
I believe that I'd absolutely oppose getting rid of the BEAR, which is what we have, which is a regional asset, and partner agencies call for that equipment. And it's about officer safety. It's about rescuing citizens. These are rescue vehicles. We are not the military. We are not, this isn't armed, this isn't an armed tank or something. This is something that can take rifle rounds and not only protect our officers that are put in harm's way, but allow us to go into a scene and rescue the citizens of Aurora from being harmed by that same firepower. And yes, we have rifles, and we have an MRAP that we received from the federal 1033 program. These are rescue vehicles, and let me give you a couple examples of how we use these rescue vehicles when we're not in that situation of an active shooter or someone that has ultimate firepower that they were able to. Rifles, we have to have armored vests now, rifle plates, because people have the capacity to shoot right through our vests. That is a way for us to protect our officers. Rescue vehicles, we have used the MRAP to rescue folks out on I-70 during the bomb cyclone that are stuck out there and running out of gas and calling for help, and 911 is being inundated with calls. We need that vehicle to be able to make it through that blizzard and get out there and rescue those individuals. We need the BEAR for not only my community, my mutual partners in this region, but also for my officers that are out there rolling up on a call where someone's has high ground on us in a second floor apartment and is able to pick them off, if you will, and not have that protection. Why on earth would I give that up? That is a protection not only for my officers but also the civilians in this community.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to our last question. Providing effective policing for immigrant communities is one of the greatest challenges facing law enforcement agencies in the United States today. Please, can you tell us a little bit about your professional experience working with immigrants and refugees? What specific actions do you propose to improve and strengthen the relationship and trust between newcomers and our police department? And we'll start with candidate Moore.
So I believe the first thing you have to do is welcome them. If they're in the United States, they should be treated as a citizen. They should be treated as people with respect and honor. And you do that by having direct communications with them. And again, I think that's just the best route. I believe community engagement starts with the chief of police. He or she has to be willing to get out in the community and meet the community where they are. If it's a language barrier, you have to work together to figure out how to create a way to communicate that's effective and efficient on both sides. So I would welcome them, anybody that comes to the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question, candidate Wilson.
Can you repeat the question, sir?
Absolutely. Providing effective policing for immigrant communities is one of the greatest challenges facing law enforcement agencies in the United States today. Please, can you tell us a little bit about your professional experience working with immigrants and refugees? What specific actions do you propose to improve and strengthen the relationship and trust between newcomers and our police department?
So for those that aren't aware, and I know the people, the fine citizens and residents of Aurora understand that we have one of the most diverse communities in the country. Refugees and immigrants have come here trying to seek solace and asylum, and they don't get a rule book when they come in. And I know the city's committed in having the Office of Immigration to help these people reintegrate into our society and help them find jobs, help them understand, help them whether it's learning a second language. But we are very much involved with our immigrant and refugee community. We have a Muslim liaison officer. We also have officers that work specifically with the Asian Pacific Center in downtown Aurora. And just recently, sadly, during the COVID pandemic, Asian Americans across the nation were targeted of hate crimes due to misconception that they had somehow brought this disease here. And I worked with the Asian Pacific Development Center to put out a video of support and to tell them that I need them to know that they can come forward and they have a friend and an ally in the police department, and that we are not going to allow hate to take over in our city. And so we put that video out in different languages so that people knew that they were able to call upon the police department, and we were a partner with them in helping them deal with the issues that were at hand during that. But we have good relationships with imams here, and we continue to have those conversations. There's a lot of hate in this nation right now, and every time something tragic happens across the nation, whether it be in Pittsburgh, at a synagogue or a mosque shooting somewhere, we reach out to those communities and let them know that we're here for them. We increase patrol, and we let them know that we're here to protect them.
Thank you. Same question, candidate Dudley.
So I've had the opportunity to work with a unique program or department that the city of Aurora has in the Office of International and Immigrant Affairs. Ricardo Alvarado Gambriera is a person who runs that particular department, and he and I collaborated to develop a International and Immigrant Teen Academy a couple of years back, and had great success with that program. I also worked with the Aurora Welcome Center, which is a center that assists our refugee community, and we had great programs that we would do there to interact with the kids within the communities. And I also participated in visits of mosque so that we could get to know our imams much better and have a relationship, a rapport with them. Because we all know that when you're in a crisis moment, the time to have friends or to make friends is not when
can actually take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give each candidate to make a closing statement, I would just ask the community again, for those that are watching or listening, if you can, please go online. There's a feedback form to auroragov.org/Police Chief Town Hall and share your thoughts with us concerning the candidates. In light of time, I'd like to maybe ask each of you to try to just give us a closing statement. If you could kind of keep it to about 1 minute or so, maybe a little over that, but just in terms of timing that we have. And I'm going to ask candidate Jones to go first.
Thank you. In my regular role each day, I build partnerships, I build relationships all through Baltimore County. I want to bring my skill set here so that we can actually engage the community properly. And I think that once we start engaging the communities that we have been over-policing and underserving, I think once we actually start really building those relationships, can we actually make Aurora much stronger in a much inclusive community. And I think it has to start with engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Next,